Hello everybody and welcome back, where today we're going to be talking about a game that could be my PSVR2 Game of the Year for this year. Now, if you recall, I actually said this about another game a couple weeks ago, and they're both in contention right now in terms of what I expect from them to become a great contender for PSVR2 Game of the Year, along with Vertigo 2, but that's already out. And the one I talked about a couple weeks ago was Wanderer. Not only does it have the potential to be a very polished and amazing VR game, it's also bringing a whole new framework to VR development that I'm very, very excited about. However, today's game doesn't have those implications for the industry, but does have big implications for VR in terms of bringing franchises to VR, and if done well, could be my personal PSVR2 Game of the Year because of its setting and my love for that franchise. And that, of course, is Metro Awakening. Now, this isn't a PSVR2 exclusive, but I think there are certain things that this port could do to elevate itself on PSVR2 and become the best version of the game, including using the haptics and bells and whistles to just the visual presentation on the OLED panels. So today we're going to be talking about the setting, visuals, characters, guns, enemies, the studio itself and the PSVR2 features, and finally the concerns about Metro VR, but overall why it could be my PSVR2 Game of the Year if done right. So let's talk about it. Now, Metro VR isn't something that's going to appeal to absolutely everybody, but for me, I absolutely love it for multiple reasons, and one of those is its setting. Metro is set in a post-apocalyptic Russia. If you're familiar with the series, you'll already know that. It's not exactly a small series, it's up there with the likes of Stalker in terms of population in this genre. But if you don't know, you've got your post-apocalyptic wasteland, a bit like Fallout if you picture that, except most of humanity is locked away in the subway tunnels and the metros underneath the surface because the surface is inhospitable and full of horrendous creatures inhabiting it. This setting could be fully leveraged in VR to be incredibly claustrophobic when you're down in the tunnels. We've seen that a bit from the trailer, where not only will you have to fight other enemy human factions which are hunting you down, but also take on a whole manner of creatures in these tight corridors, and that's where the original Metro game shines. I'll get into enemies a little bit later, but in terms of those settings, it's a really, really good example of how those confined spaces can make you feel claustrophobic and packed in against an enemy that's there to kill you. And I think in VR that could be leveraged greatly. Similarly, the outside itself, if it is present in this game, and I'll get onto that a bit in my concerns as we've only just seen underground sections, could be absolutely breathtaking. Don't get me wrong, breathtaking in the most horrendous post-nuclear war way, unless we want to expand over to Exodus, but that's a whole nother kettle of fish to talk about. But let's just focus on the first couple of Metro games here, as this is a prequel to them. We're most likely, if we're going to see the outside world, be taking in abandoned and destroyed buildings that tower over you, and many destroyed Russian monuments that could look amazing with VR's sense of scale. But overall, the sense of scale here and the detail in each of these settings and environments could be incredible. And that brings me on to visuals, because visually, Metro is pretty bleak. Now, they could lean into that with this VR port, because although it is a bleak looking environment and world, and one that's kind of devoid of hope for a lot of it, the detail within these bleak environments with crushed rubble and scattered old belongings that have been abandoned is something that I think would be very atmospheric in VR. If you've watched any urban exploring videos, or urbex as some people call it, or done it yourself, you'll know that there's an eerie vibe about these areas that have been long since abandoned. That's not something we get often with VR. The closest thing I've had to that sort of feeling is some of the locations in Resident Evil Village that have been abandoned for years that you're traipsing through. But here we could get a real sense of modern architecture destroyed with some great clarity if Vertigo make this game look as good as it should, which, knowing their track record with games like Arizona Sunshine 2, hopefully they will. The OLED panels of the PSVR2 will also make all these locations pop as fire contrasts against the dark corners of the Metro. Similarly, muzzle flashes should light up corridors in these lovely panels, and the sense of contrast for dark areas should make the visuals a real treat when it comes over to PSVR2. I just want to touch on the characters of Metro as well, because although some are more forgettable than others, there are some genuinely great character types and characters themselves in the Metro series. Each of them feel grounded, have realistic reactions to the events going on, and I think if they carry some of these characters or their archetypes into Awakening, we'll get that classic Metro feeling experience of being in those Russian tunnels. Similarly, some of the villains are real bastards, and it's a lot of satisfying fun to take them down, so hopefully we get some good human villains in this game as well, not just the monsters that inhabit the Metro and outside. Weapons are also an element of Metro that would work incredibly well in VR. If you've ever seen the weapons in Half-Life Alyx, how some of them seem not taped together, but sort of jerry-rigged to work in certain areas. It's a little bit similar here. You have weapons that functionally work fine, but look very odd and very shambled together, and it gives Metro a very unique look that I really, really like. Sure, you have your classic weapons like your Kalashnikov, your AK, but there are some like the shotguns that look really, really unique and could offer some really interesting manual VR reloads that I'm very excited to see how Vertigo pull off for this game. Enemy types is a similar story here because there are so many enemies that inhabit the Metro, from human to humanoid to non-human at all. Coming in various shapes and sizes, especially if you've been to the library in the Metro games on the flat screen. Good God, you'll know what I mean by those weird gorilla looking things that terrified me for that entire level. There are big enemies here, but it ranges. Some areas will have small spider-like creatures that scurry around and try and take you by surprise, and I'm really hoping creatures like that will be in this game. There were some shown off in the trailer that were very small and jump towards you. That's going to be terrifying, and I think Vertigo could really leverage the wide array of enemy types here in the Metro series to make it a memorable and scary experience, but it just depends on how many enemy types and NPCs they want to bring over to this Metro VR game that ultimately I think will have a much smaller budget than the mainline Metro games. Rolling on from that, the PSVR2 features could be used to leverage moments like this. If a small creature or enemy jumps on your head, the headset rumble could go off. I was just playing Little Cities the other day, and the planes that pass by in that game rumble the headset, and it's honestly a feature that I haven't seen used that much to that extent over the course of the last year. Sure, some games have had some really good examples of it, but it's one that I'd like to utilize more, and maybe encounters like this with the small enemies jumping on you could be caused to trigger that effect. Same with the adaptive triggers, they could be used for different weapon types, and capacitive touch buttons for the normal gestures that you can make in VR, which I'm sure will be there. The eye tracking as well, I'm sure, can make everything look very, very sharp if used right, and the OLED panels make the dark hallways and tunnels of the Metro even darker. Ultimately, I'm very excited for the PSVR2 features to be used here, and I'm really wondering how they're going to be used. Finally, let's talk about the company actually doing this port, which is Vertigo. Now, Vertigo have got a pretty damn good lineup of games, ranging from various different genres. I mean, for shooters, you've got After the Fall, which is admittedly a little bit dated feeling by now, but still a very competent and fun co-op shooter. Arizona Sunshine 2, that I do have my caveats and flaws with, but ultimately is a very polished and well thought out campaign that, if the lessons they've learned from that game carry over to Metro, I'm sure it'll be absolutely stunning and a great play. They've got Hellsweeper VR, which a lot of people really love for its frenetic gameplay. Seventh Guest, which I've heard nothing but praised for. Again, a different genre completely, and horror puzzle, which proves they can do horror well, which is needed for the Metro series. And The Wizard's Dark Times Brotherhood, which just came out on PSVR 2, that while it needs a little bit of a visual boost, genuinely has some really engaging gameplay elements and a lot of creativity behind it that I really, really love. And the only other game they've got on the horizon on their website is Metro Awakening, which hopefully means all hands are on deck to make this the best possible version of Metro Awakening that there can possibly be. The early footage that we saw in the State of Play it got announced in was very, very promising and sharp looking. Sure, this is probably just a couple vertical slices that have been polished up for the public, but if everything comes out looking as good as this and seemingly as fluid as this, it could be a real contender for VR Game of the Year for me. But of course there are concerns, mostly with how we've seen no above ground gameplay just yet, meaning that could be omitted entirely because of it being on other platforms like Quest that maybe can't handle massive scale environments like that. And also the fact that Vertigo have done quite short campaigns in the past. Arizona Sunshine 2 comes to mind, that did not take long to beat. I'm hoping to get a beefy runtime out of Metro Awakening. Fingers crossed. Anyway, those are my caveats and concerns, and that is a very small part of the video. The rest of it is me gushing over how good this game could be. I hope if you weren't excited before, you are now, because I am genuinely ecstatic for this release on PSVR 2. Not sure if you can tell. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you to our patrons, Luke Bentley, Ace Gamer, and recently, as of yesterday, Hazib Mirza. I hope I haven't butchered your name. Thank you all for being members over on the Patreon. You help me do what I do, day after day, month after month. If you want to become a YouTube member or become a patron, the links are in the description below, starting at $3 a month and ending at $3 a month, because it's just to show you support for the channel if you really want to extend yourself and do that. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you all in the next video.